Hey everybody, this is Miss Huval. This video is for English 2 Honors. It's part 2 of the video which discusses chapter 1 of Night. Alright, when we left off we were talking about motif. I'd like to switch now and talk about irony. I know that you know that irony is a contrast between expectations and reality. And irony is operating in this chapter on so many levels, okay? So where do we sense a contrast between what you expect and what's real? Well, for the audience, for the reader, we would expect that people who experience these things would know that they needed to be careful and to get out. And then on the level of the characters and the people in the story, there's a contrast between what they expected and what really happened. So irony here is working on multiple levels, which is a rhetorical device that I would say dominates this chapter. So let's talk first about the irony that they experience, the people who live in Siget. They expect several things to happen, and I can hear you shouting them out now. They expect the Red Army to come. They expect that they're being moved to a brick factory. They expect that they're being moved because they're too close to the front. And those expectations are fueled by misinformation given to them by the Nazis. So they should have expected. These were flimsy sort of stories, but they wanted to believe. And who could have imagined, literally, who could have imagined what they had in store for them? Okay, no one could have thought of anything so terrible, I'm quite sure. So let's talk a little bit more about why they should have expected something different, the level of irony that we as the reader encounter. So they had Moishe's warning. Okay, he escaped from the Nazis. And it wasn't heeded. On page 8, Ailey says himself that he didn't believe Moishe. And he knew Moishe. Moishe had been his teacher. And he didn't believe. He didn't want to believe. Okay? The Germans arrive. The Nazi officers arrive. And they're billeted in people's houses. And I don't know if you know that word billeted, but it means quartered. So against, you don't invite them in. They just take over your house and they live there. If you read The Nightingale, that happened to the family in France. Nazi officers billeted at their house. So even when the Germans were in their homes and on their doorsteps, they continued to believe that the best was going to happen, and they did not believe that they needed to get the heck out of Dodge. The synagogues closed, and after that was a rapid succession of things. They arrested the Jewish leaders. There were restrictions like curfew. Their jewelry was confiscated. Jews were not allowed at cafes or restaurants. They weren't allowed to travel. This happens on page 11 where they're being forced to wear the star. And we have all heard that before. At a certain point, Ailey says that the ghetto is not ruled by Jews, was not ruled by Jews. It was ruled by delusion. I think he says on page 12. And when we delude ourselves, that means we trick ourselves into thinking things that aren't true. And so all of these things happen, and the Jews are able to brush them off. They're able to live with them. They're able to say, well, the Russians are coming. It's not so bad. All we have to do is wear a yellow star. All we have to do is stay in after 6 p.m. We can live with it, okay? And I think when they're forced to wear the yellow star, I think that happens on page 11. Ailey's dad makes the comment, what? It won't kill you. Put the star in your clothes. And he makes the very just poignant comment there. He says, well, then if you don't die from wearing the star, of what then do you die? Of course, he's speaking to us as someone who knows and as someone who's experienced all kinds of stuff that his dad couldn't have imagined at this point. So it's a strange point of view that we're getting from Ailey, because he knows things that the characters couldn't possibly know, that the people in the story couldn't possibly know. But he sort of berates them for it a little bit with those two comments, right? Because he has the perspective of 2020 hindsight. Okay, so the last thing is the ghettos. And even in the ghettos, the Jews let life as usual resume, and they don't see that they need to get out. Okay? So many times in the story, with the arrival of the German officers, people are commenting, they're polite, they've given out chocolate to the ladies of the house. A lot of times they mentioned business as usual. Things happen, and then they settle down, and there's a false sense of security that goes along with that. Even in the ghettos, life as usual continued. So the ultimate example of that is probably those transports at the end of the chapter, when that first wave of people leave the ghetto. They're forced to stand outside and roll call. They do multiple roll calls. They're sitting up, they're standing down, they're being counted, their names are being called. And they're all in the heat, and there's nothing to eat, and there's no water. And eventually, as they do leave, they are overjoyed to go. Ailey describes them on page 17 as looking like beaten dogs as they walk off. But they're happy to go, because what could be worse, he says, than standing in the hot sun for hours and hours and hours at a time. That's an ironic statement, because there's a heck of a lot worse waiting for them on the transport, and of course, ultimately where they end up. So the irony is thick, and it is multi-layered. And all of this irony goes to establish tone and mood, okay? So knowing the difference between tone and mood is key. One word definition for tone: attitude. I always remember the T in tone goes for the T in attitude, okay? And mood is the atmosphere. So the M in mood goes with the M in atmosphere. That's kind of how I remember it. Okay, so the tone is the author's attitude. What is his attitude towards the situation that we find ourselves in chapter 1? And then the mood is what he creates for us, the reader. So let's start with the mood, okay? The mood of this chapter. And usually I like to do this. Is it good? Is it bad? It's bad, right? So there's no danger of being anything on the good side. The mood is ominous. The mood is foreboding. We know something bad's going to happen. And Elie Wiesel is masterful in the way he puts this together, because he uses the irony to impact the mood. He uses our prior knowledge to impact the mood. We look at these people he loves, and he mentions some of them he made fun of, some of them he loved, some of them he respected, like their town rabbi. We look at these people and we feel so bad for them, because we know what's in store for them, and they don't. We know that these chances that they have to escape this town, they should have taken advantage of. And when they don't, we're like, no, you have to do it. Let's think of some of those. And that's what creates this ominous mood, okay? So let's think of one. I wish we were all together so you could shout them out. One is the immigration certificate on page 8 and 9. If you forgot about the immigration certificate, go back and look at it. So Ailey wanted to buy one. And his dad said, no, I'm too old. I can't start over somewhere else. Page 14, when they're in the large ghetto, someone comes, a Hungarian police officer who's a friend of the family comes and bangs on the window to warn them to get out now because transports are starting. And by the time they uncover the window, because they had an exterior window which had been boarded up, by the time they get the window open, he's gone. And the Hungarian police officer would have been working on behalf of the fascist government, which was in cahoots with the Nazis. So him even coming there to warn them would be a huge risk on his part. And they miss out on that opportunity. And on page 20, Maria, their maid, comes to them, who's obviously not a Jew, their former maid, comes to them and offers them a place to hide. And Ailey's dad tells him, "You go. I'm not going." And he doesn't want to be separated from the family, so he doesn't go. Now, there were lots of Jews. I've heard and read so many accounts of Jews who heeded these warning signs and got out. Just the other day, on Holocaust Remembrance Day, there was a story on the news about a family that lived in the forest, and I've read books about that too, these communities of people who were in hiding in the forest for years. But anyway, they didn't, okay? So that's what gives us this ominous mood. We know that they could have. They had opportunities to be saved if they had listened to Moish, right? But they didn't. So that's what establishes our ominous mood, okay? So what is his tone, his overall tone? Well, it has to have a measure of regret, okay? Whenever we pick tone, once again, we could do positive, negative, no positive tone, totally a negative tone. Overwhelming sense of regret. Sense of being played, a sense of being victimized by misinformation and their own goodwill, their own goodness, their own purity of heart, their disbelief that anything really bad could happen worked against them. And how does he establish that tone of regret, that tone of feeling betrayed and feeling played? Well, it's the Nazis. He uses the Nazi misinformation. Going to a brick factory, being moved from the front because it's too dangerous for you here. You need to help the war effort by going to this brick factory. So they willingly go. They're not beaten and at gunpoint stuck on these trains. They get on willingly. And that's another insidious thing that leads to this tone of regret and betrayal. The way the Nazis employ the Jews to do their dirty work for them. And it will be a pervasive thing throughout the book. You're not going to believe how they do it. So they appoint a Jewish council over the ghettos. They make a Jewish police force, which is tasked with enforcing these rules about jewelry, about leaving the ghetto, about the curfew, and all these other kinds of things. And finally, we've got the Jews handling the last transport. Okay, they load themselves onto these cattle cars, 80 people at once. And then the Gestapo comes around and says, "All right, you're in charge. Anybody gets off this cattle car, you're dead." Okay? So this tone of regret, this tone of you being abused and mistreated, it's with good cause. And Elie Wiesel does a great job in this chapter of using all of these devices to give us this overall picture of what might have been and the tragedy that it didn't happen. Okay? So that's chapter 1 in a nutshell. I have a little assignment for you, optional of course, but I would like for you to think about doing this. I'm trying to figure out where to put it so you can see it well. There we go. Let's do a little reflection on chapter 1. Now this isn't a story, this is kind of addressing this prompt. It says, how might you have felt in Elie Wiesel's family's shoes? And it struck me today as we were talking about this, how what we're going through currently sort of has a lot of parallels between what happened in chapter 1. So, write me a little paragraph. It could be more, it could be less. Email it to me so that I can read it and make some comments on it. And in this way, we keep the channel between us open. Okay, that's chapter 1. Read chapter 2, and I'm going to post a video about that soon. I hope you're well. I hope your family is well. I sure do miss you. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.